Hi y'all, Austin here with Outer World Media Channel. Welcome back to another book review. This is going to be a review over a trilogy, if you will, and that is the Old Man's War trilogy. This is a series that, as this video goes on, you'll learn that I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this trilogy. And without digressing, let's get into it. So just kind of giving you an overview. What is this trilogy about? So this trilogy is about Earth, however many thousands of years in the future. We're colonizing out in outer space. We are at war with other species. With aliens and whatnot. We're trying to colonize. Just different planets and whatnot. We have our technology has evolved to the I don't have a whole lot to compare for the technology in this book or this series, if you will. I've never really watched Star Trek. I remember as a kid, I'd watch a 5 minutes here or there when my uncle would put it on, but I never really did get into Star Trek. And I've seen Star Wars movies once each. The original trilogy. I know I'm gonna get hate on the channel for that. So, but I'm just trying to be honest with you guys. I don't have a whole lot to go off of for comparison for the technology in this trilogy. Um, but we had like hyper warp speed where we could travel. We had um, different kinds and styles of soldiers. There's a whole lot of stuff that's packed in this trilogy. Um, and if you go back, you can see my individual reviews for each book in this trilogy. I'm going to keep going back and forth between trilogy and series because there's like 6 books. I haven't read the 4th, 5th, or the 6th. I've only read the trilogy, so if I keep saying trilogy or series, I do apologize. Um, but starting off with the Old Man's War, this book essentially introduces us to John Perry, who is going to be our main character in this book. We're gonna see, as he enlists in the what was it called? The CDF. Yes, the CDF, which is essentially the military outer space unit. It's kind of weird and unique for how this book starts off. If you read the back, I'm not spoiling anything. It is on the back of the first book. So essentially, they are recruiting for people to go to, war in space and whatnot, or enlist. They're not telling them. Nobody really knows what to expect. They just know that they don't take young people. They want old people. People that have lived a full life, that have experienced life experience. They don't flat out say why they really take old people. I mean, they kind of elaborate, but I think it's because old people don't have anybody really. Most of the people that are going in and enlisting, they don't really have anybody. Their kids have their own lives, their spouses have passed on, and they want the life experience, the snap decisions. I mean, if you take someone who's in their 70s or 80s versus someone who's a little younger than me in their early 20s, how they react and the way they think is completely different. And I think that's one thing that I really loved about this series, or how this trilogy starts, is we see everybody's instincts on how they're going to respond, and the fact that it's okay, it's these elderly people, but they don't even really know what they're getting themselves into. So as the first book goes on, John gets introduced to more characters who join up for the CDF. We go on missions with him and whatnot. We are introduced to a specific type of soldier, which I won't elaborate a whole lot on just because I don't want to spoil anything in this trilogy. But we do see more of them in the second book in particular. But we were kind of introduced very, very lightly to like I said, a certain type of soldier. And I say lightly just because we don't dive deep into the soldier or anything like that. But we follow John and whatnot in this book, and we are, again, introduced to other people, and we are introduced, just to other beings, other, aliens and whatnot. We get some description and whatnot, which leads to a huge like battle at the end of the first book. And again, I'm not trying to give away anything, but trying to tell y'all enough about these books and whatnot. And that's how this book ends, is with a huge battle. Now, fast forward to the second book, which I had high expectations for. And I'm gonna get into some stuff that I really didn't like, but I want to get through the series first. The Ghost Brigades is the second book in the series. This book, we focuses more on that particular soldier, type of soldier, if you will. We are introduced to a different character in this, named Jared Dirac. Dirac. I'm gonna go with Jared. We're just gonna call him Jared, guys. So we're introduced to, or JD. We're gonna call him JD. We're introduced to JD in this book and whatnot. He is kind of like a clone of a scientist and whatnot. And again, I'm not giving you anything away that's not in the back of these books, and whatnot. We follow him on missions and whatnot. We're introduced more into the lifestyle and to meet more of that particular soldier and whatnot. And what issues I had with the first book was lightly touched on in this book. And then we go, and again, I'm trying not to give anything away really, and then we go into the last colony, which we are reintroduced to John in this book again. And this is them trying to colonize a new planet and whatnot. We're introduced in the second, third book to even more, aliens and whatnot. And this trilogy, is just awesome. Some issues the big issue that I had, and I'll give you all the big three issues that I had with this. This is going to be, I'm going to start off doing my, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I do apologize for, kind of jumping around. This is my first time doing this for a series review. The good for this, if you are someone who does not read a whole lot of science fiction, me, this was awesome. This was a different approach than what I would normally expect, and I think even if you are a huge fan of science fiction, and I know these books have been praised, at least the first book was praised. I've seen all kinds of stuff, Googling just information about the book and the author and whatnot. I tried to get in touch with Mr. John Scalzi, tried to find a way, I should say, wasn't able to. If anybody sees this video and knows Mr. Scalzi, please let him know. I would love to interview him for this channel. But like I was saying, just trying to get into this series for someone who is not and is a science fiction fan, I really think both groups could come together and really appreciate this trilogy. This is, again, one that you don't come across a book that starts off or kind of is framed around the way this trilogy is. And shout out to Kevin Toll. I got my office mug out just for you for this video, man. But again, and the characters, that's another thing with the characters. I really did grow to like, certain characters that we were supposed to hate. I don't want to say I could care less about them. They definitely did their job and being the bad guy and whatnot, but I didn't hate them like the way the author was wanting me to, I feel like. But you know what? It is what it is. The pacing of this book, it gets better as the series goes on. I will say that. I need a sip of coffee here, guys. Kind of getting into the bad. The bad with this trilogy. I'm just being blunt about the sex scenes in the first book. And the little bit of it, and by a little bit of it in the second book, I mean it's very lightly touched on. In the first book, there is a whole half a chapter or a chapter dedicated to, these soldiers just, these people before they get to boot camp essentially, just going at it, and I didn't care. I really didn't care to read that. I mean, I understand what the author was going for. Just trying to explain that, what happens and why they're doing it. I get it. And I'm not dogging on this, trilogy by any means. I never want to be someone who puts books down by any means. I would never be one that tells, somebody that writes a book, you wrote a terrible book. I don't believe in that. I know people pour everything they have into books, So I'm not going to do that. I'm just saying, for my liking, I didn't really care for that chapter. Now, it is in the second book as well. It's not as bad. It's a bunch of people together having it. So I'm not sure if you would define that as worse or not as bad. I don't know. It wasn't as long as like a page and a half of it. So, how long it was of describing that was not as bad. I will say that. That was my big issue with this trilogy. And thankfully and luckily, that's not in the third book. I will say that is not in the third book, which I really enjoyed not having that in there. I understand, again, that there's going to be books that have that. I don't care for that personally. If you do, nothing against you. I don't like it myself reading about that. Kind of getting now into the ugly as far as what some people may or may not like, or kind of be nitpicky about this. The pacing in the first book is not as good as the pacing gets in the other books. In my personal opinion, I think the pacing in the second book is the best. In the first book, we kind of jump around here or there and whatnot. And as far as that goes, but you know what? Again, the author gets better with the pacing, and that's to be expected. As an author writes and whatnot, they are going to get better with their writing. Not to say that the pacing was bad in the last book. It's just a little bit of a slower paced book than what the second book is. Now, we've kind of come to the point, just because we're at over 11 minutes in this video, just kind of ranking these and whatnot as far as what my favorites were and whatnot. Number 3 has to be easily for me The Last Colony. Again, I like the idea of them trying to go in and colonize a planet and whatnot, and the way it comes about was interesting. I just wish, and if you go back and watch my individual review of this book, you'll see that I even say I wish they had explored more of the planet. They kind of, and the colony's name is Roanoke. If you know history about the 13 colonies and all that, I find that very interesting. I need to read more books about that. So I was kind of drawn in when I read what the name of the colony was going to be, and that kind of gave me some expectations that didn't necessarily come true with what I was thinking it would be. But again, we're reintroduced to John in this book. John is a great character. Between John, Jane, JD, Zoe, I enjoyed all the characters. Very, very much enjoyed the main cast of characters as far as that goes. But again, guys, there's got to be, a least favorite, one that I'm not likely to go back and reread. I would reread the series. I will say that. Don't get me wrong. But number 3 would have to be The Last Colony. Number 2, and I had a hard time thinking about this, just because, I enjoyed both these books so much, but I have to say that, and the more I think about it, the more I jump back and forth on this, just because if you watch my individual review of these books, that there's kind of like a heartbreaking moment in book 2, and then the next thing is when we cut to that group scene of what. But I would have to say number 2 for me is Old Man's War. This does a great job setting up the world that we're going to be in and whatnot, and setting up the cast of characters. We get different cast of characters in all 3 books. But this was such a great book. This, if it wasn't for that one scene, this probably would be number 1 for me. If that tells you how much that scene drug it down. I'm not saying it made it a bad book by any means or anything like that. It just kind of brought the book down a little bit for me. There is some great action scenes in here. There's one scene in particular where there's like a duel, which I really enjoyed reading that. But number 1, if you can't tell, guys, has to be the Ghost Brigades. This, does not have middle book syndrome, as I believe it's Mike with Mike's book reviews would say. This was an awesome book. The action was great. The pacing was great. Again, there's that heartbreaking scene, which I felt a little more attached to in this book as compared to one from like the Old Man's War. But again, guys, the Ghost Brigades. If you read The Old Man's War. If you read the first book, give the second book a try. It is awesome. I flew through this, and that's gonna be my order ranking. Don't let my ranking of these deter you from picking up this series. I really really enjoyed this series a hell of a lot. I am having to fight internally with myself not to buy the next book in this series, Zoe's Tale, and want to read that and continue on. I will say, kind of giving y'all my final thoughts on this trilogy. Like I said in my first book review of The Old Man's War, I bought these books 3 years ago when I first moved out here to West Texas. For whatever reason, I've moved like two or three times since. I've held on to these books, and I'm so glad that I did. This series, I love this series. It has its ups and downs, but the more I kind of sit and ponder about this trilogy, the more I love it, and the more I really honestly just want to reread it. If that tells you guys anything, the characters in these books are great. It's just an awesome trilogy. I highly recommend picking these up. In all honesty, if somebody in the comments were to say, "Hey, I'm kind of thinking about picking those up. Would you want to read those? Like do like a co-read with me?" I would probably say yes. I would have no doubt that I would say yes, even though I just read these, just because of how much I enjoyed this trilogy. But again, guys, the Old Man's War trilogy by John Scalzi. Go pick this trilogy up. It is awesome. Again, if anybody out there knows Mr. Scalzi, or if he sees this, please hit me up somehow, some way. I would love to interview him about this trilogy. I absolutely loved this trilogy. I know, when I was telling you guys some of the stuff I didn't like about it, it may seem like I didn't really like this trilogy that much. I absolutely loved this trilogy. I could just keep sitting here for 5 minutes straight and telling you how much I liked it. I'm glad that I finished this trilogy, that I kept it, that I picked it up. It had been on my radar for 5 or 6 years. I had never got it, and then had the chance to get it, and then about 3 years ago picked them up and just didn't read them until about 4 or 5 months ago, whatever it was. But again, guys, the Old Man's War trilogy, definitely pick it up if you get the chance. Let me know what you guys think. If you've read it before, let me know what you think of it. What's your favorite, ranking them as far as that goes. What's your favorite book? What's your least favorite? But as always, guys, thank you for stopping by. Again, shout out to Kevin Toll reviews out there. I know Kevin's a fellow Office fan, if you will. Dwight is easily the best character of the show. I don't care what anybody says. But again, guys, I do appreciate you guys stopping by. Thank you.